Happy Thursday morning, Bama fans. We are back with another episode of Bammers here on AL.com on our Crimson Tide YouTube and Facebook channels. I'm Matt Scalisi. I'm joined by Ben Flanagan, as always, here where we come to you every week on Thursday mornings to talk about the things that Bama fans like to talk about. And we've hit on some tough topics before, but this is a topic that Bama fans, I think, really enjoy talking about. This is one of those topics that I think fans from the rest of sports, we often hear say things like, I don't see how it's even fun to be a Bama fan. There's no exciting games. Your expectations are too high. There's no drama going into a Saturday. But the truth is, as we all know, that Bama fans actually really enjoy watching blowout victories. They like no drama games. They like beatdowns. They like, as Nick Saban once characterized them, and I'm apology. This is not a sponsored video, so I don't feel bad saying it. He called them ass whoopings. Okay, that's his term, not mine. But we're going to call them beatdowns today for the sake of any children that might be watching. And that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about Alabama's biggest blowout wins, but also their most memorable ones, the ones that stick with you, because there's a lot of them. And Ben, you and I have been doing these lists for most of 2021 at this point. We almost always have some overlap on our lists when we're doing these topics. But we didn't today. This is the first time that we've done two separate lists, and we didn't have any of our entries the same on our top fives.
Yeah, well, first of all, like, what would Captain America say about that language, Matt? I know that you're ashamed of yourself, but yeah, it's so many to choose from. Like, normally when we make these lists, I can kind of just sit there for about 5 minutes and rack my brain a little bit and come up with a good solid 5 and a few honorable mentions. This one, I had to scour the internet.
Yeah.
I had to go into the archive of schedules and just try to pinpoint, when was this blowout? When was that one? No, that was them, not them. That was a blowout, but not this time. So there were so many of them. And Matt, because it's too easy to do this, I am going to, this is for my list. And we're also talking about the Saban era. Again, this is Bammer's quote, the Saban era, right? Like that's what we do here. To the chagrin of a lot of Alabama fans. But that's my list anyway. But for mine, I'm sticking with the regular season. I am not going any postseason at all because –
well, then that's part of why our lists are different.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like I've personally covered a lot of that ground in past episodes, and I don't want to repeat myself. And it's convenient because I don't have to repeat myself because I have so much to choose from. So I can put these blowouts over here and choose from the many of them from the last 14 years or however long the Saban era has lasted, and just make a solid list and with many honorable mentions. So fun list to make. And like you said, I just want to reiterate this as Brandon Green is commenting on the screen here. Close games equal hard issues. Keep the blowouts coming. I like boring games. Like, I like boring football where it's really boring for everybody but Alabama fans who like to win and win big, right? Great games are great in retrospect, but I think for a lot of Alabama fans, you want to be as far ahead as possible by halftime, right? And you don't want to worry the rest of the game. And even before then, too. Like, I mean, a lot of these games we'll talk about, the game was not in question after the first quarter. So that's how I like them. I like the stadium emptiers, where all I have to worry about is, like, where did I park my car? I got to take down the tailgate later. Who's going to help me do that? That's what I like to stress about on game day, not the game itself.
Well, yeah, as we mentioned, Brandon Green weighing in there. We also had one from the Original American, great username earlier in here. And a big part of this show is we want you guys to comment and give us your suggestions while we're doing it. And we will put them up on screen while we're talking today. So if you've got a particularly memorable blowout win, beatdown that sticks in your mind that you want us to talk about today, or you just want us to highlight, drop it in the comments wherever you're watching, whether it's Facebook or YouTube, and we will put it up on screen. We'll also read whatever comments you have, like this one from Tristan Tillman, who says he's a 13-year-old boy from Alabama who wants to be a quarterback one day. So he's blessed to be an Alabama fan. So well, good luck to you, Tristan. Hopefully we'll see Tillman on the back of a Bama jersey, on the back of a number 12 or something. So we're getting some future Bammers on the show already. You've seen we've had some former players jump into the comments in previous shows as well. So everybody get involved in the comments today, and we'll pop your comments up on screen. Ben, what's your first one that you wanted to talk about today?
I'm going to go in chronological order, and just to emphasize, these are the most satisfying blowouts, right?
Yeah.
Like there are different levels of blowouts, Matt. Some are more memorable than others. For me, these are the most satisfying, and it kind of crosses over into an episode that we did a couple of weeks ago where we celebrated Alabama's pettiest wins. I think a lot of those petty wins are blowouts.
Yeah.
And there are some blowouts where it's like they shouldn't be included on this list, but I'm feeling petty today, so I'm at least going to include them in the honorable mentions. But I got to go back all the way back to 2008, which is insane that it's been 13 years since this game happened. When Alabama opened the season against Clemson, that was, for so many people, the launch point of the Saban dynasty, right? Like 2007 definitely had some warning signs for the rest of college football that Alabama is at least onto something. But after that LSU game, everything hit the fan. Louisiana Monroe happened. It ended up being a disappointing season. But when 2008 came around and the 08 class was in the building, guys like Julio Jones and Mark Ingram and Terrence Cody and you know the rest. Alabama just looked like a different team. They were ranked 24th coming into the season. That would obviously change. I think Alabama reached number 1 during the season going into that SEC championship game against Florida. So they climbed the charts, and a big reason was this blowout win over Clemson, who was ranked 9th. I don't remember who was favored in this game. I have to assume Clemson was, Matt. Maybe you remember just because they were ranked so much higher. But Clemson fans who are obviously in a much better place now probably don't look back on this game and hang their heads as much as they have in terms of, the Alabama rivalry. They've beaten Alabama when it's mattered the most. They've won 2 national championships. But back when this happened, Matt, like this just felt so good to watch because it just seemed like Alabama was a dominant team again against a top 10 opponent. And then you had these guys again. You saw Julio Jones performing. You saw Mark Ingram performing. John Parker Wilson really came into his own as the leader of the team, the guy under center who was going to lead this team to great things. And Alabama fans didn't really feel a certain way about Clemson, I don't think, or Tommy Bowden, who was the coach at the time. But Clemson did at that point have this reputation for Clemsoning, right? So, but you didn't know if it was going to happen here. You didn't know if this thunder and lightning backfield that they had with CJ Spiller and forgive me for not remembering the other running back's name, but they were an incredibly talented team. But Alabama just came with a new identity that year. The defense looked dominant. The offense looked balanced, and the ground game looked powerful. But I don't think Alabama fans expected what they saw. They went into the season, I think, with tempered expectations, hoping that Saban would right the ship after that first sort of wonky year, and they did. And Alabama introduced themselves in a big way, and it was really satisfying.
Yeah, Clemson was actually top 10 going into that game. I think you mentioned Alabama was ranked 24th entering that season. They were there's differing stats on it, but really 2008 for the most part was the last time that Alabama entered almost any game as an underdog. They entered the game against Georgia later that season. They were also underdogs in that game, and they might have been against Florida in the SEC championship too. But other than that, I mean, this is really the last time. This is one that I refer to often as this is the last time that Alabama ever shocked people. It hasn't happened since then, I don't think. It was, and we've actually over on our video team, wherever you're watching this, if you dig through the video archives, you can find it. We did a documentary a couple of years ago about the 2008 Alabama team, and we talked to John Parker Wilson and Rashad Johnson and a bunch of other guys on that team about this game in particular. And they said they really did go into it expecting to win. They thought that they were better than people were giving them credit for. They weren't shocked that they were good. I think they were shocked by how easy it was for them to mow down Clemson going into this game, because they were prepared for it to be a really tough game. And I remember John Parker Wilson telling us that they went into the locker room at halftime and they were all stunned, like looking at each other like, we knew we were going to be pretty good, but like I don't think we all thought it was going to look like this. And they were almost a little shell-shocked themselves at how easy it was for them to dominate that game.
Yeah, Alabama fans were too, Matt. Like I remember that night pretty vividly, like not knowing what was going to happen. I was at a wedding weekend when they moved the wedding to Sunday to accommodate people to watch the Alabama-Clemson game that night. That's just the way things work in Alabama, as people watching know. But Alabama held Clemson to 0 rushing yards in that game. And I think that 2008 team had one of the most underrated backfields of the Saban era. I know that Alabama fans will remember it fondly, but I mean, compared to all who have come afterwards, Mark Ingram, Glenn Coffey, and Roy Upchurch, that is a sick backfield. And they performed that night for sure. Mark Ingram and Glenn Coffey each with at least 90 yards in the game. Nick Walker, the tight end, led the team in receiving, had a touchdown that night. And Julio Jones, obviously, he had 4 catches for 28 yards. One of those was a short touchdown from John Parker Wilson, but not eye-popping stats, but he certainly made his presence known that night when fans got their first glimpse at this like super recruit that they had been hearing about all along. But really, it was just the total package. That 08 class compounded with what Nick Saban had already sort of built the year before. It was just a really entertaining game. Yeah,
great offensive line making its debut in that game as well, which I think was a big part of why they were able to just mow down that Clemson team. I also remember very distinctly that Clemson so Tommy Bowden, who talked to us about this again in that documentary we made, Tommy Bowden had a star recruit running back, despite having those 2 upperclassmen that you talked about. And he had, while recruiting this player, he had promised him that he could have the first carry of the first game of the season. And so he did it. Tommy Bowden gave this kid this, despite having 2 great running backs on the team, Tommy Bowden gave this young recruit, 5-star recruit, the first carry of the game. He fumbled the ball, which was recovered by Alabama, and that's how the game started. So just an absolute disaster for Clemson, inadvertently leading to what they are now, you might argue, because this is really a game that got Tommy Bowden fired and got Dabo stuck in there as the replacement. So an ominous moment.
Yeah, I don't know if it's true, but I remember hearing at the time that Tommy Bowden like called Nick Saban like the next week or during the offseason to say like, what did we do wrong? Like, what did you see like on our end? Like, why did y'all dominate the way that y'all did? Is there any truth to that? Do you remember that?
He's humble. I don't remember that specifically, but and it may be true, but I will say he's not the kind of guy who would explain it away. I mean, he was very humble about it when we talked to him. He basically looks at it and says, that's kind of when I knew that I wasn't going to be able to be a high-level coach in college football. Like he realized he couldn't hang with Saban, and he realized he did a lot of things wrong in building that team and getting it ready for that game. So he would not tell you anything other than that it was a complete domination by Alabama. They outcoached him and they outplayed him. So yeah, good, a very memorable one. I was in the building for that one. I remember it very well. Ben, I did not limit myself from postseason games when I was making my list, but I did want to pick one that I don't think we've talked about on here before. And I wanted to go through Alabama's SEC championship games as a part of researching for this, because I felt like a lot of them had been undramatic. I mean, they've obviously had a couple of tough ones there, but the one that jumped out at me looking at it was 2016 when they were playing against Florida. And it was the second year in a row that they had played Florida in the SEC championship game. It was Jim McElwain, the former Bama offensive coordinator. And obviously Alabama won in 2015, and Florida got their shot at a rematch, and it didn't go well at all. This is one of the most one-sided stat lines I have seen from any conference game that I can think of that Alabama has played in, let alone an SEC championship game. Bo Scarborough rushed for 93 yards in this game, 2 touchdowns. You also had Damian Harris with 86 yards as the backup. Josh Jacobs played in this game too, had another 35 tacked on top and a touchdown. A pretty good game for Jalen Hurts, 138 yards passing and a touchdown. But this was a complete defensive domination, as you would expect from that 2016 team that was just so incredibly dangerous on that side of the ball. You go over and look at Florida's offensive stats in this game. 0 yards rushing in an SEC championship game. They had about 261 yards passing, but 3 interceptions in this game. And Alabama, this is just sort of that type of game that you saw out of this 2016 Alabama team where, the offensive yardage looks okay. Like Bo Scarborough obviously had a good day, but 2-yard rushing touchdown from Bo Scarborough, 1-yard rushing touchdown, 6-yard rushing touchdown from Josh Jacobs. It was just sort of like Alabama had such short fields all day long because this defense was so dominant. They had so many they could take the ball away from you just at any given point in the game. Josh Jacobs also scored on a punt return, 27-yard punt return in this game. Minkah Fitzpatrick had a 44-yard interception return touchdown in this game. So just so many ways that team could score that you'd look at their offensive stats sometimes and say, how is this game a blowout? How is this a 54-16 final score?
Yeah, that was the year of the not, right? The non-offensive touchdowns when Alabama had that incredible streak where they would score touchdowns on defense and special teams. I don't think we'll ever see anything like that again in our lifetime. Like, it was so unique in the moment, I remember. And it's so funny that Alabama's first 2 touchdowns in this game were non-offensive touchdowns. So it's like they were already carrying that streak into the game, and boom, it happens in the first quarter twice. So it's just amazing how dependable that became. But yeah, I mean, we've talked about this 2016 defense before, Matt, with guys like Reuben Foster, Ronnie Harrison, Jonathan Allen had a sack and a half in that game. Rashaan Evans, Ryan Anderson, like the list goes on. I mentioned Minkah Fitzpatrick. Like, that defense was so stout. Like, every name that I read just then was either like a first-round draft pick or they're starting in the NFL right now. So just an amazing collection of talent that played extremely well together, like unique chemistry. And like you mentioned, like Alabama could beat you on offense, but they didn't necessarily have to. So an amazing time to be alive as an Alabama fan, that's to be sure.
All right. We've already seen some good suggestions, a couple that I haven't put up just because we're going to get to discussing them in a minute. But this one was pretty good from Tristan, our future Alabama quarterback. He's calling the 2021 Bama versus Auburn as a blowout win already. So
he sees the future. Yeah,
bold prediction. All right, Ben, what's your next one?
My next one jumps all the way to 2014 when Blake Sims is quarterback. Lane Kiffin is there as offensive coordinator in his first season. It's the Texas A&M game when Alabama won 59-0 and jumped to 6-1 in overall and 3-1 in conference play. But it was just an absolute annihilation, Matt. It included a 35-0 second quarter when Alabama just blitzed them with guys like Sims and Yeldon, Derrick Henry. Amari Cooper obviously had his magical Heisman finalist season. But the game is interesting in context for me because it came after a really close call in Arkansas the week before when Alabama barely escaped with a 1-point win over Arkansas. I believe that
That's right.
was followed by a Nick Saban rant where he remarked that, like, nobody's ever satisfied. It doesn't matter if Alabama wins by 59 or wins by 1 point. A win is a win is a win, right? And Alabama found a way to gut out a victory on the road. And then the next week they righted the ship and beat a ranked SEC team 59-0. So they kind of like regained their mojo after that, obviously, but it contains some amazing highlights. So the one I remember best is the Blake Sims 43-yard scamper where he just juked Texas A&M defenders out of their shoes. A really good call by Vern Lundquist. I know Alabama fans feel like they don't hear that sentence very often, but he did a great job calling that moment in particular. But just to see these stars just do what they do. I mean, Amari Cooper with a 24-yard touchdown, a 45-yard touchdown, and I mentioned Derrick Henry with a 40-yard touchdown run, or catch and run. So just an amazing blowout performance all around. I believe, I'm not sure where we were in Kevin Sumlin's tenure, but I know that was the first year post Johnny Manziel. He had left for the NFL at that point, and so they were moving on post Johnny football, and didn't work out. And they even after beating Alabama and then competing with them the next year, they were on a downward trajectory in terms of where they stood in the SEC West and where they stood on the level with Alabama, and they were not, obviously, that year. So an amazing, just powerful performance from Alabama.
A fun stat from this game. So Texas A&M had 172 total yards in this game. And, a fair amount of plays to get that done, too, because this game went on forever because Alabama kept scoring. So 172 total yards. TJ Yeldon had 159 yards by himself in this game. So he was 13 yards shy of Texas A&M's entire offensive output in this game.
Yeah. Amari Cooper
and he split carries.
Yards.
Like you said, he wasn't even by himself. It wasn't like TJ Yeldon was one of those solo backs that got every carry. I mean, he was splitting time pretty evenly with Derrick Henry at that point.
Oh yeah, 13 carries total, and he had a few receptions, but it was just dominant. It was dominant, and I think A&M. I'm looking at the box score now to try and remember. Kenny Hill was their starter, who I think was a dual threat quarterback.
Kenny Trill.
That's right. That's right. Who didn't have a lot of experience. And Alabama took advantage of that. Yeah. And then Kyle Allen was the backup. I think may have been a true freshman at that point. Kyle Allen, I think, who went on to is maybe still having a not so terrible NFL career.
I think so.
Right. So interesting to look back. And again, it's unfortunate that Blake Sims hasn't been able to play professionally because, like, the way that fans may have hoped, but they can always look back at games like this when he had just a very special year in his lone year as the starting quarterback. Blake Sims is a guy that I always miss as a fan. And Jake Coker got in the game too. Like, the game was obviously so out of hand. Jake Coker, the backup, he comes in, goes 5 for 8, throws for a touchdown, and everybody, it's just a big party for everybody. Everybody got in on the fun.
That's a good description of these blowouts in general, Ben, and I think why Bama fans love them so much, that less fortunate fan bases maybe don't quite understand is it does kind of have this, it takes on this party atmosphere at a certain point. And some of it is about, you get to see all these different players have their moment in a game like this. You get to see the true freshman running back score a late touchdown because you're not trying to pile on, but they just can't stop these guys. And I think that's kind of a fun aspect of these games is, it's valuable, I think Nick Saban would say, for younger players to be able to get in, but it's also just fun for fans to say, I don't even know who that guy is that just scored a touchdown.
Yeah, they're like quasi A-Day games at some point where it's like Nick Saban might as well be, in a suit and mic'd up behind the quarterback during the second half of it just to run it again. It becomes situational practice for Alabama to see, like, who's going to be the star of this team 2 or 3 years from now. Let's get them in the game and see how they do.
Fun stuff. Okay, I'm going to another postseason game, and we have talked about it on the show before, but it bears talking about when we're talking about one-sided wins for Alabama. This is the 2015 Cotton Bowl against Michigan State. And I almost don't, I think there's some part of me that almost you as a fan, you're not usually ever going to feel bad for the other team during the game or even after the game, and particularly not a team from a major conference or the Big Ten. But like Michigan State is one of those where there's not really a strong historical relationship between Michigan State and Alabama. It's not like Ohio State. It's not like Michigan or Penn State where there's a long trash talk history between the two schools. Like Michigan State's just kind of like, a little bit of an underdog in their own way in the Big Ten. And they find a way to win the Big Ten championship in 2015, partly because Ohio State did some baffling things in their game against Michigan State. They just sort of, I think still to this day, you'll see Ohio State fans wringing their hands about that season and that game. So they find a way to make it to the playoffs, and man, they could not hang. They did not belong on the field with Alabama in this game. It was actually only 10-0 going into halftime, which all things considered pretty good position to be in for Michigan State. But there was kind of a ominous moment at the end of that half where the Michigan State quarterback, Connor Cook, they're potentially driving to cut this thing close, and he gets intercepted by Cyrus Jones. And that pretty much told the story of how the rest of the game was going to go. Alabama came out in the next half. Jay Coker pretty much immediately hits Calvin Ridley for a touchdown. We get a punt return touchdown from Cyrus Jones later in the half. And then it's pretty much all over from that point. Calvin Ridley gets another 50-yard touchdown catch. And then really what sealed the deal and really kind of hammered in the unnecessary humiliation in this game was Derrick Henry's final touchdown in this game, where he throws a defensive lineman who was a first-team All-Big Ten player. Derrick Henry stiff arms this guy, and I believe he's still currently in orbit. I don't think he ever hit the ground again after this, but just an absolutely devastating moment in this game. And there have been a few of those, where it's kind of it's a moment that it sort of synthesizes for everybody how far above Alabama is than their competition. And I think that was one of those examples. I think you can also look at a couple of moments from last season, particularly when Devontae Smith was doing his thing, and it was just apparent that there was no chance that the other team could stop Alabama. This was, to me, one of those moments where when that happened, it was pretty obvious that Alabama was at least much, much better than everybody other than Clemson, which we would find out the next game that they were pretty evenly matched with Clemson. But other than that, I don't think anybody could touch that 2015 team when things were going right.
Yeah, I know Ole Miss is hollering, "We beat Alabama."
They
we
did,
beat Alabama. Yeah. But they did. But no, look, that defensive end you're talking about, he's in good company. I mean, Derrick Henry does this to all pro defensive players, right? Like it's unfair what he's able to do, and you might as well get out of the way. And you mentioned, like, you prefaced that just by saying Derrick Henry's final touchdown. It's like whenever you look back on his career, especially in that 2015 season, like a fun memory for me was always that last just gutting dagger touchdown that Derrick Henry, whenever he found the edge, right, he was just gone, and it just sealed the deal, and it just was the last straw for the defense. And yeah, that was a great game. We talked about it a little bit when we talked about underrated players, and Cyrus Jones, who was arguably the MVP of that game with the punt return and the interception that you mentioned at the end of the first half. A frustrating day for Connor Cook, for sure. He was a pro-style quarterback that I think a lot of people thought would be a first-round pick. I can't remember if he was or not. I know that he ended up on the Raiders. But anyway, Alabama was dominant. They were just dominant. That was one of those things where it was like you knew from the get-go that with that matchup, you know it's probably going to go a certain way. I think people probably thought that the year before when Alabama drew Ohio State in the first round of the college football playoff, but Ohio State obviously came to play and beat Alabama, punched them in the mouth. So You knew that there was that possibility. But then you remember, like, just looking back on all of these blowout wins, like the state of Michigan could populate 80% of our lists here in terms of Michigan or Michigan State. Like, pick which blowout game you want. Which Michigan State blowout do you want? And which Michigan blowout do you want? So, and it's a little sad, too, considering, Nick Saban used to coach at Michigan State and has just whacked them each time he's played them at Alabama. So yeah, that was a really fun game. But those semifinal games are so they're double-edged swords, Matt. Where it's like, again, you're getting into that 8A thing where it's like, okay, we know this might be a blowout, we know this might be fun. Alabama's going to the final. They're going to play for a national championship, but don't let anybody get hurt in this game. Rest the starters, get them out of there. Alabama's up by 30 points, get them out of there. So I have a love-hate relationship with those semifinal blowouts. For sure.
All right, let's go back to the circuit that you're on with our regular season blowouts. I've actually still got one more postseason one, but let's do another one from your list.
So I've mentioned this game before, and I'm going to stick with the 2015 season, so we don't have to go back too far. But I'm going with Alabama versus Georgia in Athens, 2015. It's pouring down rain. Georgia fans are going nuts, dressing up like Jokers with Legion of Doom spiky shoulder pads on, and the Georgia team is talking trash to Alabama. Yeah. The Georgia team is talking trash to Alabama as they're going out on the field. There's a little scuffle pregame. Alabama's not the favorite going into the game for the first time in a long time. And Alabama has also just lost to Ole Miss, as we just mentioned. So Alabama's season is on the line. Like, it's must win from here on out. And Georgia is a top 10 team. Alabama has dropped all the way to 13th, ranked 13th, which is hard to believe. And so Georgia's got this big chip on their shoulder too. They're thinking we're about to beat Alabama. We're about to end their season. It's going to be similar to the 2010 season where it's a write-off, but the rest is obviously history. Alabama dominates the game. The defense, obviously, very dominant, other than a late Nick Chubb 83-yard run in garbage time when Alabama was up 38-3. They I think, were going to hold them under 100 yards running, and I think they had a rushing, and I think they had a streak going into that game until Chubb broke it. Obviously, a great player. But what I love about this game, other than the Georgia fan tears that CBS kept cutting to, is Alabama, as we've mentioned before with some of these games, they just beat you in so many ways, right? You have that Derrick Henry 30-yard run. You've got a Minkah Fitzpatrick punt block for a touchdown. You've got Jake Coker hitting Calvin Ridley for a 45-yard bomb touchdown in the rain. You've got Eddie Jackson with a pick six for 50 yards. So it's just like, pick your poison. This Alabama team is so balanced, so versatile. The defense is so dominant. And Georgia was puffing their chests, and it just felt good to watch this one. This was extremely satisfying. You love watching those games in the rain that you win, especially when it's so one-sided.
The Minkah Fitzpatrick punt block touchdown, I remember being extremely funny, in part because the ball, it just physically is a funny thing to watch. The ball just bounces right back up into his gut.
He just never had to work. He didn't have to work less for a touchdown than he did right there.
Yeah, but also if you go back, if you go on YouTube and watch that play, you could find highlight reels from that game. The way it was broadcast is particularly funny because it's really, that's the moment where Georgia fans disassociate from their bodies, basically, and they cut around to the crowd, and you can start to see some of the fans, some of the student fans, just kind of like shaking their heads and laughing to themselves, like, okay, that's what kind of day this is. Everything's going to go wrong for us. You can actually hear. Right as the punt's being blocked, you can hear someone scream like they're being murdered. You can hear a woman's screech on the soundtrack to the game. For some reason, I just remember those details of that play. I want to say, Ben, is there also a Jake Coker rushing touchdown in that game?
That sounds right. Yeah, 2-yard run in the third quarter. Yeah, to put Alabama up 38-3.
And that one is also funny because Georgia at that point has become so physically dominated in this game, and they're ready to get pounded up the middle again, and they so overcommit near the goal line that Jake Coker basically rolls out on a naked bootleg and trots in to the corner of the end zone. And no one's there racing him to the end zone. He's not having it. It's one of the most low effort touchdowns you'll ever see an Alabama player have to score. They weren't, they were doing everything they could to stop Alabama from just running straight into their faces. That they had to choose not to defend the edges, and Jake Coker just sort of got to trot in.
Matt, am I allowed to show a GIF from this game, like on my phone here?
Yeah, sure. If it works, yeah.
Yeah, if you can see this. Yeah, do you remember this
guy?
Very
good. Yeah, very good.
Yeah, that's the kind of day it was.
So we have the combination of the sort of Mad Max armor plus Joker makeup. It's good, yeah.
And a bloody stuffed elephant on his shoulder too. Maybe on top of one of those Road Warrior spikes that he had. But yeah, just like
I don't know why they do it to themselves.
My advice to you, I'm sure nothing feels better than to beat Alabama. But my advice to you is don't come in a costume, because those CBS cameras know where to find you, and if you're having a bad day, then they're gonna find you, and you're gonna become a meme or a GIF. I don't recommend it. That's my advice.
Yeah, just help yourself out. Do yourself a favor. I had to get an Iron Bowl in here. There actually have not been a ton of Iron Bowl blowouts, as we know. Gus Malzahn and Gene Chizik really were kind of thorns in the side for Alabama. They gave Alabama a tough time, and I wanted to pick one, though, because I feel like Alabama fans always feel like a blowout in the Iron Bowl is particularly satisfying, obviously. I had to go with 2008, Ben. To me, probably ranks up there as one of the most satisfying wins overall for Bama because of the fact that it was ending a long streak, because of the fact that it was really it was in Tuscaloosa, which also ended an unspeakably long losing streak for Alabama in Tuscaloosa. I believe that's the first time they ever beat Auburn in Tuscaloosa. I think even though it's not the biggest blowout, it's a 36-0. I think the fact that it was a shutout also really kind of adds to that as well. So it was a game everybody came into knowing that Alabama was going to win, but it kind of still didn't lose any of its impact and any of its sort of emotional power that it had when it happened, regardless of whether people knew it was coming or not. And a couple of big touchdown runs from Glenn Coffey in that game. Mark Ingram actually scored 2 touchdowns in that game. And then the really, I think the thing that a lot of people remember that sort of sealed the deal of that being a blowout win is Greg McElroy coming in at the end as a backup and throwing a real unnecessary touchdown pass to Marquise Mays to cap that win off. Just kind of a final dagger in the streak and in Tommy Tuberville's domination of that series for so long. So, I think that's one where it was less about a celebration of how great Alabama is, like a lot of these others have been, and more of we can finally put one of the most humiliating periods of our history to rest.
Yeah, very satisfying. That game was a big exhale. I remember it was satisfying for all the reasons that you mentioned. We've talked about this game a few times, and we've talked about the Sir Stacy moment prior to the game where he brought the game ball out, got the crowd hyped up. Just an amazing moment that still gives people chills. I think at that moment, people probably thought, okay, this is going to be a special day. I remember that touchdown very well, the Greg McElroy to Marquise Mays late game. You know what? One interesting thing about that game is it was the only time that I ever saw Charles Barkley in person. And I was on my way into this. I was a student, and I had acquired a ticket for free because that season, I think it was that season I forgot to buy my student tickets. And so I didn't have any tickets, but obviously I wanted to go to the Iron Bowl. And there was this system back then where you basically could like enter this lottery. And if somebody didn't want their ticket, they could just put it out there into the online ether, and whoever was next in line would get that ticket put on their at card. And that happened to me. Turned around in like 5 minutes. I registered for it. I got a ticket to the Iron Bowl, free ticket to the Iron Bowl. Amazing goodwill gesture by whoever didn't want their ticket that day. And so I'm walking into the student section, and I see this big crowd of people just kind of like moving in one direction together. And then finally I spot Charles Barkley is in the middle of it. And he's just decked out in navy blue and orange. And he's got this huge smile on his face. And he is just talking trash with all these people, cajoling with them, as you would expect Charles Barkley to. This is a guy who obviously everybody loves, even Alabama fans. And he's just having a great time on his way into the game. And I just thought, what an awesome moment to see just like one of the most recognizable people in sports having a great time, even though his team's about to get blown out, even if he didn't know that. But that was special, and then the game that followed it was amazing. So a great day to be an Alabama fan.
Yeah, Barkley's a great part of the Iron Bowl rivalry in particular because, and I'm obviously saying this from the Alabama perspective, because Auburn fans, of course, love Charles as well. And he is a great trash talker as a winner, but he's also really, really funny when Auburn loses. And I think that's part of why Bama fans love him almost as much as Auburn fans do, is because he takes his medicine and he laughs about it, and he makes fun of himself and his own team when they lose, which is the best kind of fan, the kind of fan that doesn't take it too seriously and remembers that it's a game. So he's about everything you would want as a sports celebrity, as a sports figure. I think we've got 2 left each at this point, then.
Yeah, so mine, I'm going to jump ahead to the next season from 2015 to 2016 when Alabama opened the season against USC. And Alabama won the game 52-6, okay? And this was one of those games that was scheduled, several years prior to when they played it, back when I think everybody thought USC is going to be a contender. They've been a contender in recent history, and by the time we get to 2016, Alabama and USC is going to be primetime stuff. And it's going to be one of those games that determines the outcome of the season, right, from the jump. And that was not the case. And Alabama was, once again, with their non-conference opener, just on a completely different level than their opponent. Not Alabama's fault for scheduling USC. On paper, that's a great matchup. And they have an interesting history, and where USC has beaten Alabama. So you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen going into a season. But what I loved about this game in particular, Matt, it wasn't so much about the game itself. It wasn't how I felt about USC, because I really didn't have any feelings one way or the other. Like, as an Alabama fan with Alabama's dominance, I think of, how would Alabama's dominant teams do against those, early 2000s USC teams coached by Pete Carroll? Like, that's what I think about with Alabama USC, those ridiculous conversations that you have as sports fans. But what I loved about this was Alabama had not even determined who their starting quarterback was going into this game. And so this game, which we joked earlier about how these blowouts become these sort of like A-day adjacent games when the position battle is happening in real time. This was the case for the most important position on the field, under center. And you had 3 guys who were going to get playing time going into this game. And Jalen Hurts obviously ends up winning the job. He ends up playing pretty well in this game. You mentioned earlier that a Clemson running back got the first handoff of the game and fumbled it. The same was true for Jalen Hurts. His first snap as Alabama quarterback, he fumbles the ball away to USC. And so it doesn't start out well for him. His amazing storybook college football and just football career started off on a really awkward note, but he recovered. He threw a couple of long touchdown passes to a wide open Ardarius Stewart, one of those underrated players we talked about on the last episode. Marlon Humphrey has a pick 6 in this game. Jalen Hurts has a couple of touchdown runs. And Jalen Hurts was a guy that we had only heard a little bit about. I think we'd seen him play an A-Day at this point, I'm pretty sure. And he had, certainly raised the eyebrows of people who were intrigued by a dual threat true freshman, even though Alabama had these blue chip recruits and Blake Barnett, Cooper Bateman, guys that everybody kind of thought Alabama would they would decide between one of those two quarterbacks. But Jalen Hurts, here he comes just out of nowhere and ends up winning the job as a true freshman. Definitely Saban's first true freshman quarterback. And the rest is obviously history. But what I just love about this, Matt, is that Alabama was still undecided, maybe even after this game, even though Jalen Hurts ended up playing well. Because, I mean, late in the game, Blake Barnett threw a dime to Garrett Dieter for like a 50-yard touchdown pass. So it's just so funny to me that while the other team over there is struggling and you know, their season is on the line here, their reputation, their dignity, even as a college football program, and Alabama is working through their position battles during the game. So that's just amazing to me, and it's one I'll always remember.
Yeah, and I actually rewatched the sort of highlights from this game not too long ago, and I can remember thinking, you know, you can really already see kind of the signature things that made Jalen Hurts so good as a player, and you know, I think you can tell he didn't have the pocket presence yet, which I think is one of those things that really comes with time, where you're not constantly, you know, moving your feet around, and you can trust the offensive line, and you trust your knowledge of the offense to know where your receivers are going to be. That stuff's not there yet in this game, but especially when his first touchdown pass, where he rolls out of the pocket and then launches the ball downfield, you can that to me is kind of a signature Jalen Hurts thing, the ability to throw on the run. As you roll out of the pocket, that became something that was so dangerous about him. And then his run up the middle for a touchdown later in the game. It's hard. I probably have to really take a more time to write the right words about it. But Jalen Hurts has such a unique and specific running style that I think you can see right from the get-go. And what it is, I think, more than anything, is that he's not afraid of contact at all. And it's part of what made him such a successful running quarterback. He has such powerful legs that he's really not, unless you are getting him around the shoulders and you're a defensive lineman and you're hitting him full speed and he's not full speed yet, he's not scared of you. If you put your arms around Jalen Hurts' legs, that's nothing to him. It will barely even slow him down. And you can see it in the touchdown run at that game. It reminds me a lot of some of his great touchdown runs. It really is almost an echo of that game winner he has against LSU later in his career, and the touchdown run he has against Clemson late in that national championship game that very well could have been a game winner as well.
Yeah, all great points. You know, Jalen Hurts was so interesting because his style of play was so brand new to Alabama fans. This was just a different type of quarterback. And what was so cool about him is that you had no idea how he was going to beat you on a given day. You know, like he was either going to run for a few short touchdowns. He may have found Ardarius Stewart for a couple of wide open, deep passes. His stat line wouldn't necessarily show, like you'd mentioned in that Florida SEC championship game where Alabama won 54-16, where Jalen Hurts' stats seem rather, or to a degree, pedestrian compared to like what the score looked like. And that happened a lot when he played. The same was true for this USC game where he had 4 touchdowns. But if you look at his stats, they're just like, okay, well, he definitely beat them and beat them badly. But these are not like, you know, they're not going to win your fantasy league. You know what I mean? So that's what was so interesting about Jalen Hurts to me. It's like you didn't know how it was going to happen, but it was going to get done, and he was going to beat you. And it had a lot to do with the talent that was around him. Guys like Calvin Ridley and Ardarius Stewart and O.J. Howard, his offensive line, and obviously the defense in 2016, which was so dominant and carried Alabama and scored a lot of those touchdowns on those stat lines. that we had mentioned before. But yeah, he was great. I mean, we had obviously seen dual threat guys or guys who were at least capable of running for touchdowns and running the ball in general. Like we had mentioned Blake Sims, who I honestly thought didn't run as much as he could have, especially like in the as the RPO era was emerging. Jake Coker was a guy who was known for running the ball and running for some bruising touchdowns. Even John Parker Wilson, he had a couple of games where he had a lot of sneaks and ran for touchdowns. But Jalen Hurts was a guy where it's like, we don't know if he's going to tuck this. We don't know if he's going to throw this. Are these designed runs? And he's a guy who could just beat you in a variety of different ways. And we've gone over it time and time again.
I would say one of the best ball carriers, if you want to categorize it that way, that Alabama has ever had. I'd put him up there with almost any running back.
Yeah, and protected the ball too. Like he was a guy who did not. We mentioned the USC fumble, but he's a guy who didn't want to make a lot of mistakes, and so he was always quick to throw the ball away if he didn't see something as he was developing as a downfield passer. He didn't want to turn it over. He didn't want to throw a pick. He didn't want to fumble it. So very few turnovers as a passer for sure for Jalen Hurts, but he's a guy who wanted to protect the ball, protect possession, and win the game. Like that's what was great about Jalen, is that he was a competitive guy who wanted to win, and it obviously started with that USC game. Yeah,
agree with Walter Hunt here that the Jalen's touchdown probably should have been a game winner there. Unfortunately, a little too much time left on the clock in that game.
Yeah, we could do a list of the ones that got away.
That's right,
and just sound so sour and bitter. But as Alabama fans, we're perfectly capable of doing that.
Yeah, and actually, we just got another comment that's going to be my next pick here, which is 2020 LSU, and Matt O'Brien also had just nominated that one. So, look, this game, I think a lot of people wouldn't necessarily put this up there because 2020 is such a weird season and because it wasn't a full-strength LSU team by any means. I mean, they had so many guys that opted out and so many guys that were out for other reasons in this game. But, man, I think you got to put it up here because of the context. I think coming off that 2019 game where LSU left Bryant-Denny Stadium, couldn't have been crowing harder. And of course, they won the game, so you get to do whatever you want when you win. But I think there was a desire on the LSU side to make that feel like a passing of the torch, like a moment where a shift has occurred. And we're on top of this rivalry now. You know, Alabama's beaten us for so long. It's been almost a full decade since we've beaten Alabama. And now that's over, and we're back. We're back to dominating this rivalry. And that 2020 game was a pretty clear answer to whether anything has changed in the long term for this rivalry. That LSU team was completely outmatched. And Ed Orgeron had no answer from a coaching standpoint to try and make his team competitive. On top of it, I think there's always an aspect, and not every school is like this, but I think LSU particularly likes to take pride in having so many homegrown players. And it's part of why they have such heat with Alabama is Alabama's been so good at taking great players out of not just Louisiana, but out of Baton Rouge specifically. I mean, there's a high school that's literally on LSU's campus that Alabama has gotten multiple 5-star players out of the last few years. So it really sticks in LSU's craw. And I think the fact that Alabama basically beat LSU in this game with a Louisiana native player in Devontae Smith was kind of a little cherry on top of this game that I think if you could have asked Alabama fans if they could shut one team up last year, it would have been LSU. And man, did they do it.
Yeah, I mean, Alabama is also proud of LSU's homegrown players because most of them play for Alabama. And you mentioned all the crowing after the 2019 game. Like, to me, that season, like in that fan base, and look, Alabama has plenty of flaws as a fan base too, but that was the most – I remember when I had my first beer season that I've ever seen from a fan base before in my life. And you mentioned it too with Ed Orgeron and all the crowing afterwards. Their coach was caught on camera crowing about it, right? Talking trash after the game. And I understand, again, feels good to beat Alabama. But the fact that the head coach has to get out there and say we're going to kick their butts, on the field, kick their butts in recruiting, kick their butts coaching, blah, 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 and couldn't back it up. And, okay, you lost a bunch of players to the draft. Okay, you lost a bunch of coaches to turnover, et cetera. This is nothing new for Alabama, right? Like, this is nothing new. Alabama has rolled with the punches, moved on, regrouped, reloaded, as fans like to say, and won again after the fact, or at least kept it competitive, And LSU was unable to do that in 2020 for one reason or another. The main reason was Alabama was just that much better than them. So
yeah, I think it was I think what happened to LSU in 2020 was a good example of the contrast between Alabama and LSU, which is that, and most other programs too, right? I mean, LSU's not the only team in the last decade or two to win a national championship and then totally fall apart. We saw it happen at Auburn after 2010. I think it's not easy ever to win a national championship, but it is, let's say, more doable to build your entire program towards one big apex moment where you've got everything timing out to win a national championship. It's a different level of difficulty entirely to build your program in a way that you're basically at that level every year. And you can lose a bunch of players and still compete for a national championship the next year because your whole program is built to do that. I think that's one of the things that has separated, Alabama, Clemson, maybe Ohio State from a lot of the other teams, even the other teams that have won national titles in the past couple decades.
Yeah, it's funny, Matt. I was listening to the radio this morning, some Birmingham sports talk radio, and they made a point that said, who doesn't get enough credit? Joe Burrow doesn't get enough credit. And I was just
I don't know, man. I think he got a lot of credit.
Yeah, and this person who was talking knows a lot more about football than I do, but I was just like, doesn't get enough credit? LeBron James. He doesn't get enough credit for, the basketball player that he is. Doesn't get enough credit. Yeah, that was bizarre. But let me just jump into my number one, Matt, while we're here. My number one is LSU 2018. Or not number one. It's just the last on my list, and it just aligns with your 2020 pick with LSU here. And the reason this game was so satisfying was, again, LSU had a major chip on their shoulder going into this game. This was going to be the game of the century, right? And Alabama was an unstoppable force at this point and was just rolling through the competition, dominating everybody. And I remember the narrative going into this game was, if there's one team that can match up against Alabama and stop Alabama and is as talented as Alabama across the board, it's LSU. And they're playing them at LSU in Baton Rouge, Death Valley, Tiger Stadium, under the lights at night. So this is it. This is what's going to happen. Tua Tagovailoa is just obliterating everybody in sight. Hasn't thrown an interception all season. And so the idea is, he's going to throw his first interception against LSU. And sure enough, he did early in the game. And it's like, here we go. LSU is finally the team Alabama matches up against, and they're going to slay the dragon here in Tiger Stadium. But sure enough, didn't happen, and Alabama wins the game 29-0. And Joe Burrow was on this team, as a matter of fact, and Ed Orgeron was coaching this team. And look, I mean, you want to get hyped up going into a game, and LSU had a lot to play for. They were ranked number 3 going into this game, had one loss, so the national championship was in their sights too at this point. But Alabama was just on another level in the SEC at this point. We all know what happened at the end of the season. Alabama just ran into the buzzsaw that was Clemson. But prior to that, it was like a masterpiece. It was a work of art of a regular season, and obviously did very well in that semifinal game. But on the way, this LSU game was just so satisfying, and to watch Tua Tagovailoa do it all in one leg, basically. And searching for that Heisman moment too, Matt, that seemed to elude him during the 2018 season. Never mind that he ran for a 44-yard touchdown scramble run on one leg, came up limping at the end of it. I guess that didn't qualify as a Heisman moment. But Alabama outgained LSU 576 to 196 in this game, and it was just utter domination. And again, super satisfying. I want to include as many picks on this list as I can from seasons where Alabama ended up winning the national championship. Didn't happen in this case. They came relatively close, but this LSU win was very satisfying, and it continued a very long streak of beating LSU, obviously, until the next season.
It was Ben, you mentioned, I think a big part of the satisfaction of this game, as you mentioned, was the build up to it and the hype that came from LSU. I don't think you're going to see Alabama fans, at least not in the last, 5-7 years. You don't really see Alabama fans hype up individual games anymore. I think the fan base has really adopted Nick Saban's philosophy of we're our own biggest opponent every time. If we just play our best game, we're going to win every game. You don't see Alabama fans circle games on the calendar and say, this is the big one. We're going to get extra hype for this one. But LSU did that in this game, and they really, really went all in. And there's, as you said, there's a risk when you do that. And it's that the other team is going to feel extra good when they beat you. And going into this game, the amount of hype that had been built around it was so big. Game day, I believe, was there for this game. And our colleague, Michael Casagrande, got a video of Ed Orgeron walking into the stadium before this game, trying to hype everybody up, trying to hype himself up. I don't know if you remember that video, Ben, but I've actually got a screenshot from it right here. He was this was a WWE level entrance that Ed Orgeron was trying to do for this game. And again, we've seen this miscalculation happen so many times. You talked about it with 2015 Georgia, I think, too. And you could go back to the blackout game in 2008 at Georgia. It just so often seems to backfire on teams when they try to say, actually, this is a big game for us. We're extra excited about this. That doesn't seem to go your way very often when you do that against Alabama.
No, bad idea. And that photo you showed of Ed Orgeron, that was him. That was him at a 2, I think. Like that was.
You show that one more time.
Yeah, that was. That's pretty standard Ed Orgeron. That's like getting out of bed and walking to the bathroom, I think.
Yeah.
After
you have a particularly spicy gumbo, when that gumbo hits, that's the meme here.
Exactly. So no, you're right. It backfires. Don't. I almost included the 2008 Georgia game on my list here. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit later. But don't do it. Don't do it. Just dress how you would normally dress going to a game. No costumes. No face paint that'll run when you cry. Or you know what? Have fun. Do whatever you want. But just like I said, those CBS cameras are looking for you. So just be careful.
And Ben, I've got one more left on my list. We don't have to spend a ton of time on it because we've already talked about it on this show on a number of different episodes already. But I just feel like I got to put 2012 versus Notre Dame on here. I think, to me, and again, some of this might be influenced by the fact that I was at this game. I was there working in this case, and it is probably the biggest atmosphere that I have felt pre-game at a game that I've attended personally. The only other thing I can compare it to that I've been to personally was the 2008 SEC championship game, which just felt so huge at the time. Really did feel like a national championship game. But this game, honestly, I would say it was even bigger. Notre Dame fans come from all over the country, and they have a lot of celebrity fans too. And I think that added to it too. I saw Vince Vaughn on the sidelines before this game. It was in Miami, so there's this kind of extra glitz to it. This game was being hyped as probably the most attractive TV matchup that we had ever gotten in the BCS era. And people were so thrilled and so excited about this matchup. And it just wasn't close for any second of gameplay. From the moment this game kicked off, it was a stunning beat down. I think probably this game did more than anything else, any other single game that Alabama has had, to kind of solidify Alabama as this terrifying buzzsaw of a program. I think people took Alabama seriously after 2008 and 2009, and even 2011. Obviously, they were coming off several great seasons in a row already. People took Alabama seriously in 2012, but I think after this game was really the moment that, in the minds of college football fans, Alabama began to pull away from everybody else, and they began to realize this isn't just the best team this year. These guys. I don't know if anybody's going to beat these guys.
Yeah, this to me is the apex of the Saban era for many different reasons. Again, it's a blowout against a team that a lot of Alabama fans had disliked for a long time in Notre Dame, and I think dominating in the way that they did eliminated that frustration and that history and those issues that Alabama fans had with that program. But I think the Notre Dame problem was over that night, even though I think Notre Dame still leads the series record even after Alabama. Even though Alabama dominated them again when it mattered most in the national semifinal last year. So Alabama won when it mattered the most. They did it in convincing fashion. And I've said it before, but I think that this game is the best example of this Alabama brand of joyless murder ball that everybody talks about. You have the efficient offense, all the balance. You've got the brutal running game, dominant defense. And then I always think about that moment between A.J. McCarron and Barrett Jones at the end of the game. They're arguing about a snap count when they're up by 4 touchdowns and there's like a minute left on the clock or whatever it is. It's just like the epitome of what I think Nick Saban wanted his program to be at the time. And it didn't really get better than that. Maybe there's an argument that it did, but that to me is just like, if I had to have one game symbolize the dominance of Alabama during the Nick Saban era, it's probably that game.
I agree. I think it's a good representative. All right, Ben, I know you have some honorable mentions you wanted to hit up before we wrap up today.
Yeah, I want to just touch on these. I mentioned Petty. For me, the 2012 Tennessee game was a lot of fun for more personal reasons, because I had access to seating I've never had access to in a football game before, and I had food and comfortable chairs, and somebody gave me these out of the kindness of their hearts. The only time it's ever happened to me, and I just got to watch Alabama blow out Tennessee in Knoxville. I got to eat Tennessee's food and just watch A.J. McCarron and Amari Cooper just dominate and on their way to a national championship, that national championship that we just got done talking about. So that's a personal one. Vanderbilt in 2017, wasn't this the game when Vandy went into the game talking trash?
That's
Vanderbilt,
right. Yeah.
Vanderbilt talking trash, and you had some national sports writers saying that Vanderbilt D is legit, man. Watch out. They're legit. Watch out, Alabama. And then Alabama wins like 59-0 or whatever it was. I can't remember. And that was a big coming out moment.
Tua's first touchdown,
to Devontae Smith. And then Ole Miss 2018, that was a good one because we talked about it before. Ole Miss, first play from scrimmage, they have like an 80-yard touchdown to DK Metcalf, I believe, and they go up 7-0, and then Alabama scores 62 unanswered points, and the score is like 52-7 by halftime. Just a really satisfying win. And then the last one, I guess, I think from that 2012 season again, when Alabama blew out Michigan to open the season.
Yeah, that
was a really fun one, and that was when Alabama fans got their first look at T.J. Yeldon as a true freshman who looked great early on. I think C.J. Mosley had a pick 6 in that game. Just another satisfying non-conference win, especially against a Big Ten team. And somebody I think in the comments mentioned Michigan State in 2010 in that Capital One Bowl.
Good one.
A game I think I watched at your house, Matt, actually, and that was very satisfying just to watch one Michigan State quarterback after the next one just get dragged through the dirt by Alabama's defense. So there are so many, Matt. I could go on, but I'm going to stop now.
A few people have brought up Tennessee, and I didn't have any Tennessee games on my list. If I was going to pick a Tennessee game, I would say 2018, just because I think that was kind of Tua at the height of his powers, and again, just was just sort of unstoppable in that game. There was nothing Tennessee could do, and really was a complete. It had a sort of funny postscript too, because Jeremy Pruitt came out after that game and basically said, we're not going to be any better than this until we have completely different players than we have right now. So, and look, he called it. He didn't get better players, and so they didn't get better. And Jeremy Pruitt's not the coach anymore. So
yeah, about that.
Yeah. Well, Ben, lots of good picks today. Thanks to everybody in the comments for contributing. We had a bunch of good discussion going today, and we'll be back again next week for another Bammers. Thanks to everybody, and have a great weekend.